My suggestion is going to be that you have notes open on a separate device, or you're ready to pause the video to take notes because I am going to go very quickly. So first we have key vocabulary and definitions. Problem, hypothesis, independent, and dependent variable. We will practice doing all of these, but pause the video and take some notes for yourself. Problem is simply the question you want to answer. The hypothesis, we will practice doing this in the correct format. It will always start with the word if, and you'll first talk about what you're going to change. The then portion explains what you think is going to happen to your data, and then your because portion tells why you think that is going to happen. The independent variable and dependent variable we will practice. The independent variable is the factor you are changing, and the dependent variable is basically your data you're collecting, or what is being measured. When you do an experiment, you will also have a control group and an experimental group. The control group is going to be your baseline measurement. This is the group where we are not really going to do anything to, and so that we can compare the experimental group to it to see is there a difference between the two groups. Then we have a constant. There are usually multiple constants within the experimental group. These are the variables that the test subjects stay the same. Now, this is not the same as the control group. Control group and experimental group and the constant variables are all different things, so pay close attention to that as we practice it. And then finally, you will have your reasoning and conclusion. This is where you determine, was your hypothesis correct or incorrect, and you're going to base that on the data from your experiment. Here's our first practice problem. Eugene and Leslie were conducting an experiment to test the effect of fertilizer on plant growth. The pair decided to test 3 of the same plant over a week and were given the same amount of water and light. They would give different amounts of fertilizer to each plant. Plant A received no fertilizer, plant B 10%, and plant C 25%. Eugene and Leslie decided they were going to measure the plants in centimeters each day. So here's the problem. They want to determine the effect of fertilizer on plant growth. That's actually in the very first sentence. When we write a hypothesis, the if part is what you are going to change. So what they're changing is the amount of fertilizer. So if a plant is given more fertilizer, the then part is your prediction of what do you think is going to happen to your data. Then it will grow more, and then the because portion says why. And the because is your reasoning part. So because fertilizer provides the nutrients. Next, we identify our independent and dependent variable. The independent variable is what you change as the scientist. So Eugene and Leslie were changing the amount of fertilizer that each of the plants got. The dependent variable is the data that they collect. So what were they writing down to see what was different? They wrote down the growth of the plants in centimeters. Control. Now the control is the group that receives no experimental changes to it. So plant A is going to be the control because they received no fertilizer. And then finally, things that have to be kept constant between plant A, plant B, and plant C include things like they all have to receive the same amount of sunlight. They all have to have the same amount of water. They all have to be the same type of plant. They all have to have the same type of fertilizer. So everything has to remain the same between plants A, B, and C, except for the one independent variable of the amount of fertilizer that was received. On this next problem, I'd actually like you to pause the video, read through this, and try to determine all of the different pieces of the experiment on your own. Identify what the problem is, try to write a proper hypothesis in if, then, because format, identify your variables, identify what the control group would be, and give at least one constant. So go ahead, pause the video, and try this one on your own before I go through it to see how you can do. So the first thing is identifying what Colin's problem is. He wants to really figure out, and it's in the first sentence, which distance shot is most accurate for him. He wants to test the effect of distance. So he wants to know, well, which shot is the most accurate? Now, the hypothesis is a little tough. The if part is easy. What is he going to change? Well, he's changing the distances that he's shooting the ball from. So if Colin shoots the ball at 3 different distances from the hoop, that's what he's changing. The then part is a little bit more difficult because how are you going to predict which shot is going to be the best for him, because we really don't know anything about Colin. So I just kind of made something up. I put that his accuracy would be the best from the free throw line, and my reasoning, and again, I made this up, is because his game stats show that he has an 85% free throw accuracy. So your then part is basically which shot is going to be the most accurate, and then why do you think that? So if you couldn't come up with a because, that's because we really don't have enough data here to come up with a because, so I made it up. The independent variable is the distance of the shot. He's shooting from 3 different locations. The data he's collecting, the dependent variable, is the number of shots that he made. And then number 4, the control group. Again, there's not really a norm for Colin. So again, I kind of made this up, that it was the free throw that was normally his best. And I kind of just connected that to my hypothesis. And you could have made something else up. You could have said that the shot from 5 feet away was the best because he's usually a forward who shoots from the 3-point line. That would have been fine too. But you just want to make sure that it all makes sense. And then finally, what are some of the things that needed to be kept constant? Every single time, it should always be Colin shooting the ball. He should always use the same basketballs, the same hoop, be on the same court, take the same number of shots. Everything should be the same for Colin, and he should probably do it all on the same day at the same time to make sure that his shot is the same every time, that he's using the same form when he's shooting the ball. Those are all things that have to be kept constant. Okay, so I've got another example for you. Again, the best way for you to do this is to pause the video and try and do it on your own. If you don't practice on your own and then check your answers, you're always just waiting for me to give you the answers. So pause the video now, read through this, and try and do all of the different parts of the experiment and identify them, and then I'll come back and you can check your answers with me. Okay, so in this example, Theodore is really trying to figure out which weed killer works the best to kill his weeds. So what he does is he's got 8 different test areas, and he's gonna try out 3 different types of weeds. He's got Roundup, he's got Preen, and he's got Scots, okay? So your hypothesis. Of course, you don't know anything about these weed killers. So you're just going to make a guess, okay? So first part is the if part of what is being changed. So if Roundup, Preen, and Scott's weed killers are used to kill the weeds, that's what he's doing. The then part is your prediction. Which of the weed killers do you think is going to work the best? So I chose Scott's, okay? So then Scott's weed killer will kill the most weeds, and then we just need a logical reason for why. So we could say something like, I've seen commercials for Scott's, and they say it kills 99.9% of weeds. Or I've used Scott's before, and it has worked very well. The person at the shop suggested Scott's as being the best. You really can make up any sort of logical reasoning as to why you're making that prediction that that one is the best. The next part is the independent variable. What is it that Theodore is changing? Well, he's changing the type of weed killer. He's got 3 different types. And what is he going to collect data on? His dependent variable is going to be how many weeds are growing. That's what he's going to collect that data on. What is his control? His control is the area he's not applying any sort of weed killer to, because you've got to be able to compare. You have to be able to compare, okay, what is the weed killer doing to an area that is not having the weed killer applied to it. And then finally, what are some things that need to be kept the same or constant throughout the experiment? You want to make sure that you are applying the weed killer with the directions of how to apply it. You want to make sure that it's in the same environment so that each area is having the same amount of sunlight, the same amount of rain. You want to make sure that maybe if you can start with the same number of weeds, or consider that as you analyze your data. How much do the weeds change? as you are analyzing the data. So when you're in an outside environment, it's hard to make sure that you are keeping things constant, but if you're in the same area, you can try to keep that environment the same.